Imagine a world where more women had the time and resources to fully explore their genius. Welcome to She Rebel Radio, a community-driven podcast dedicated to supporting women to unlearn conventional rules and create businesses of significance. This is our International Women's Day series, bringing you insights and advice from noteworthy women entrepreneurs here in the UK who strive to create more meaning, impact and purpose. Our headline partner for this podcast series is NatWest. NatWest have been a pioneer in supporting women in business since the publication of the Rose Review in 2019, which identified the disparity between male and female entrepreneurs when starting a business. NatWest have been implementing key interventions and providing essential wraparound support to realise the unrealised potential of female founders. My name is Lulu Minns. I host retreats and create spaces for entrepreneurial women to explore their genius. And today I'm going to create that same space for you right here on this podcast episode. Welcome to episode 94 of She Rebel Radio, the courage to transcend our ego with Mary Gregory. Mary is an executive leadership coach, speaker, facilitator, and the author of Ego, Get Over Yourself and Lead. With over 30 plus years experience in business, 25 of them in coaching and leadership, Mary loves to empower leaders to build momentum and increase their impact. Last year, Mary and I connected when I was invited to appear in her Lessons in Leadership video interview series. I very much respect her as a fellow coach and woman of business who I really enjoyed speaking with. So ladies, get ready to lead and create impact. Mary, I've been looking forward to speaking with you as always. How are you doing?
I'm doing really, really well, and it's absolutely fantastic to be here. So I'm delighted to be here, Lulu. Thank you for asking me.
Oh, my pleasure. And yeah, we're looking forward to creating some depth around the ego today and supporting the listeners of how they can lead. So I'd love to, I keep coming across, funnily enough, recently, the Greek myth of Narcissus, where the word narcissism comes from.
Yes.
And the story, where he as a hunter rejects all romantic advances and instead falls in love with his own reflection in a pool of water, which is the first time he's seen what he actually looks like. Now, how does that tie in with our ego? What is the ego and how does it differ from narcissism?
Well, there's quite a big difference, actually, although ego does, in some respects, you could say ego does drive narcissism to a degree, but narcissism is much more extreme than you and I having to deal with our egos on a day-to-day basis. So maybe it'd be helpful if I just explain a bit more about what ego actually is, because ego really is our psychological defense mechanism. It's a whole system of defenses that we've created from a very young age to help us and protect us from social anxiety. So it's a fear-driven reaction that we have to the world around us. And it's our survival strategy. So maybe as young children, we might have had an experience, maybe, going to school or whatever, something happened. We might have felt like we were in trouble with a teacher or whatever. And we learned there was a certain way of being that would help us deal with that anxiety. And therefore, having learned that and made that decision, that becomes hardwired into us or has become hardwired into us. So when we're faced with situations where a similar type of anxiety might arise, so thinking about in trouble with the teachers, maybe being flagged down by the police for speeding or whatever, it's going to trigger our ego. Subconsciously, it'll trigger our ego because we want to defend ourselves from that feeling of anxiety. Now, how that differs to narcissism is that narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder is what it says on the tin there. It is a psychological personality disorder. So it's kind of where the ego has got out of control to huge extremes. If you've ever had experience of working with or being in relationship with someone who's narcissistic, you will notice that they are people who really crave and dominate attention. It's all about them. If you've ever been in a room with somebody where it feels like there's no, they take up all the energy, all the attention, that's somebody who's definitely got some very clear narcissistic tendencies. And you could say we've all got a few of those. There are times I want all the attention, and it's my birthday this week, so I want to make sure I get nice cards and acknowledgements from people. But the difference between it just being an ego type of thing to it being, narcissistic personality disorder is the extent to which it is quite disturbing. And I think those that are narcissistic, they don't have an ability to empathize, to understand other people's perspectives. They're very insensitive to other people. It's all about them.
Yeah, I love that you said in terms of the ego being a, fear-driven reaction to kind of others and encounters with people, and to, a response to social anxiety. It's interesting, isn't it? The last 2 years, we've probably seen social anxiety go up quite a bit with the pandemic and lockdown. Does that mean that our ego's been triggered, do you think?
Well, I think our ego, the whole thing about ego is it does get triggered. That's interesting research to do, isn't it? To look at how different has it been through the pandemic in terms of how much we've been vulnerable to being triggered. It'd be different things that would trigger us. Some of us might have been triggered by the fact we feel isolated from other people. That might have been a potential trigger. But the whole thing with ego is it does get triggered, and a lot of it is unconscious. 80% of it is unconscious, according to research.
Yeah, so, and probably more. Did you think that 80% increases as we get older?
Unless I would hope that for those people that are on their own journey to build their self-awareness, become more conscious of themselves and the impact they have on those around them, that potentially that won't get bigger, that they'll actually manage themselves more effectively. But I think that the paradox of ego is we can't live with it, can't live without it. It's part of who we are. It's part of our survival mechanism in the world. I think what's interesting in the work I certainly do with leaders is recognizing when your ego might get activated. And, the whole idea is that this might have served you as a young child to react in this way, but as an adult, it's not necessarily helping you now. So what different options can you open up for yourself in terms of different ways you can be in these situations?
And how important that self-awareness piece is.
Oh, completely. I feel like I harp on about self-awareness all the time because it just is so key to us being effective. It opens up so many choices for us.
Yeah, we have to learn to watch ourselves. So can you give us an example of an overinflated ego compared to an underinflated ego?
Well, I do talk about overinflated and underinflated in my book because quite often when we have underinflated egos, we don't necessarily recognize that as our ego, but it is still our ego. It's our survival strategy that we've learned to be that way. But overinflated, when our ego is getting overinflated, we tend to be quite dominating. We would tend to want to be very right about a situation. We may want to make sure everyone comes round to our way of thinking, or alternatively, we might even say, well, I don't even need them. I'm just going to get on and do this on my own. We may... I can think of people in my life who have this ego trap, which is get smug about things like I'm all right. This is your stuff. I'm okay. Why do I need to deal with this? So there's a lack of openness and a sort of self-congratulatory. Everyone else is the problem, but I'm all okay. And we may well find that we're blaming others when we are in that place of overinflated ego.
And what about underinflated? How does that manifest?
Underinflated is, as you might imagine, the polar opposite, but it is still ego. So it's that small voice in our head that might be causing us to hold ourselves back, where we become more submissive. We're anxious about keeping other people happy and upsetting other people, which might cause us not to speak up, which again can cost us in so many huge ways, particularly if you're navigating your career within the workplace. But that we may well be very skilled at keeping other people happy, but that may lead to resentment because we're not getting our own needs met. We give up our needs in favour of other people. And then there's a sense of sometimes feeling like a victim, feeling like we've been done to, sort of poor me, if only, that sort of mentality is illustration of our underinflated ego in action.
Amazing. Really great examples. So the Rose Review, completed by Nat West and featuring throughout this series of She Rebel Radio, speaks about, on behalf of female entrepreneurship, that women are less likely to think they lack the necessary skill and expertise to run a business, and also are also more risk averse. Do you think
Yes.
that's because women tend to have an underinflated ego, or I quite often call it a deflated sense of entitlement I come across when I work with women?
Yes, and I like that description that you just referred to there as well. It's a lot to do, ego is kind of starts to be developed in our childhood, on the experiences that we've had, the way we've been brought up. So there are differences in ways boys and girls are brought up, as we all know. So my experience then of working with women, so coaching women or designing and delivering women's leadership programs, absolutely is consistent with what the Rose Review is saying. And there's research that demonstrates that women, when they're talking about their achievements, for example, and a lot of women I work with have huge discomfort around owning their successes and their achievements. They find it really difficult to actually say, I did this and I've been really successful in achieving this today or over the last few months. They really struggle with it. But
Yeah.
what we've noticed is the difference in the languaging. Just shifting the language can make a difference. So women will tend to, about an achievement, they'll say, we did it. They'll point to the team and say, we did it. The team did it. They won't say, I led the team to do it, which they have done. That's a fact. They have led the team to do it, but they don't necessarily own it. Whereas men will just say, I did it, and not even mention the team. That's well researched documentation. And
Yeah.
also,
Mhm.
yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's come up on my retreats and group work with women, that say, for example, we might say, sorry, I'm late, instead of thank you for waiting for me.
Yeah.
Again,
Yes.
there's this, that you've made a mistake, etc. And I
Very.
think that's a good example as well.
Yeah. And another one that I find is, I can't do it. So a woman will say, I can't do that, or I can't do it. Whereas a man will say, it can't be done. Another really interesting play on language and the difference that can make with the message that you give about yourself to other people.
Yeah, because that perspective of a guy saying that is kind of like, well, yeah, if I can't do it, it can't be done, rather
Yeah.
than that focus on self,
Yes.
in terms of I can't do it. That's really
Yes.
interesting.
I think
But
what I'd also want to say, though, as well, Lulu, is that in terms of leadership skills and what gives you that leadership edge in today's world, the need to be collaborative, the need for high levels of emotional intelligence and sensitivity to others, women have those skills in bucket loads.
yeah,
It's kind of naturally how they've been brought up and what we've developed, and how our skills that come to us much more naturally. Men are much less adept at that than
yeah.
women are. So this is a great opportunity for women to really step up and be phenomenal leaders in the world as we go forward, because they have so much more naturally the skills that are needed for today's very complex, fast-changing world. So I do want to sort of put that across. And that's why I kind of want to say to women, it's great to be able to actually just state, this is what I've achieved. It's not, that to me is not an ego thing. That's just pointing out a fact. I did
Yeah,
this.
definitely. But as you say, also, if women, and I'm sure there are many men that do this as well, pass that credibility to their team as well. That's not always a
Yes.
bad thing, because, to pass that to your team and for them to take, I saw the opposite of that sometimes in the legal profession. If something went wrong, one of the guys might blame their secretary, right? When it was actually
Yeah.
them.
Yes.
Because they couldn't have that on their, professional, prestigious position, which I just couldn't bear, even as a young
Yes.
trainee. That was just
Yes.
totally unacceptable to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
I also think this is where courage comes into it as well,
Yeah.
because women are hardwired much more so to shrink back. So it does take kind of, okay, deep breath. I'm going to say this. I'm going to put myself forward. I'm going to share what I and my team have achieved. And that's where the courage comes in.
Yeah. So how can we amplify and inflate our ego as women a little bit? And again, we're not trying to generalize here. And there are a lot of the She Rebel Radio listeners that, break out of those corporate environments and start their own businesses. So, do we still need to inflate and amplify our ego instead of shrinking it back? And do we still need to get over ourselves? As you said, it's still ego.
Yeah. I think there is a need to get over ourselves. I know, I'm a typical woman. I have days where I find myself playing small, and I've kind of got to give myself a pep talk to get over myself in those moments. And so that's where self-awareness and knowing that you've got different options and choices can make such a difference. But I think also consciously shifting your language around how you talk about yourself is really, really powerful, as we've already said in the examples that we've given. And also, there is something for me. I'm a great believer. I mean, I do think it's fantastic that women leave the workplace and start up their own businesses. But I'd like to see more women in the workplace taking leads, particularly at those senior levels within organisations, because they can make such a fantastic difference the way corporations do their business.
Yeah.
And there's something about lifting each other up. I'm a great believer in really giving each other a voice and advocating for each other. And I think that's if you're really feeling uncomfortable about advocating for yourself, to find someone you can partner with and you advocate for them and they advocate for you is a great way to get the ball rolling, really.
Yeah, really important. So you've talked about as well, consciously shifting language. And I noticed this actually at a networking event the other day when everyone was introducing themselves, and, there was a couple, and again, the woman gave him all the credit for the business. I just do X, Y, Z. So how do we, start to become consciously aware of our language, and how do we start to become separate ourselves? You talk about separating ourselves out from our ego. Yeah. How do we start to do that?
Well, I think, noticing is the first thing. That's the first key, isn't it? Start noticing. Maybe if you're in a situation where there's an opportunity, if you're doing a presentation, get yourself videoed, get it, so you can look at what you did that was really great and what language you might have used that wasn't so great and didn't help you so much. Having colleagues, finding yourself a coach or a mentor, that's going to be really helpful because they can really stretch and challenge you and give you feedback on how you're coming across. But I think one of the most easiest things you can do is by starting to notice is actually in a practical way, keep a log of your emotional reactions and maybe choose a day a week when you're going to log how you're feeling at any given time during that day, or how you responded in a meeting, what happened, what did you say, where might you have felt triggered, what might be at the cause of that trigger. And if you do that for a day a week, for a month, even then you've got 4 days that you can compare. What are the things that are triggering me? What is the things, where do I get in my own way in terms of having emotional reactions? And by starting to do that, you're starting to build your self-awareness. And as soon as you start doing that, of course, when we're aware, it opens up that capacity to choose, am I going to do that again next time I'm in a situation like that? So that's a very practical way you can start building that consciousness.
Yeah, really great advice. And I love that for, women in corporate in meetings. But then also, it's been my experience and many of the women that I support, and we probably have about 70% of the listenership are probably women running their own businesses or going in that direction. Your ego gets triggered massively when you leave that safe environment. And that structure and, that doubt comes in. So really powerful to, I wish I'd done that when I started. And, I might not have left so promptly had I not, tracked my triggers when I was still in legal. So I think this is a really interesting question in terms of, if we are not our ego and that little voice that sounds like us, that's either, overinflating or underinflating ourselves or situations that we come into, then what are we? I certainly know what my perspective is on that, but I'd love to know what yours is.
Well, this is certainly my perspective. We are not our ego. Our ego is our defense strategy. I just can't emphasize that enough. It's not who we are. I believe that who each of us is a unique and perfect individual. That's how we were born when we were brought onto this earth, and that's how we remain if we learn to manage ourselves and speak our truth. And my belief is that we're all put on this earth to make a positive contribution, and that we all have an abundance of talents and strengths that support us to deliver the reason that we're here. And we've all got within us like a purpose that is there. It's like a seed that's within each of us when we're born. And through life's experiences and through going on our journey, that seed, it's about allowing that seed the opportunity to grow and become aware of it. That's why it is like a journey. You can't just suddenly at age 15 suddenly say, this is my purpose. It's something that develops over time through our self-awareness. And it's about managing our ego so that we have the courage to access that part of ourselves, find what our purpose is, and make that contribution that we're here to make in the world.
Yeah, and is it fair to say that we need to soften that defense strategy a bit so we can find that seed and that purpose? And, seeds are vulnerable, aren't they?
Yeah.
They need nurturing. And
absolutely, they need nurturing and soft, quiet, reflective time, which in the world of work, I've spent a lot of time in the corporate world encouraging leaders to sit back and have reflective, quiet time. So important to allow that time to just soften and be with yourself and see what emerges from that, from just being with yourself. Very, very powerful.
Yeah.
Our ego likes to keep us busy.
Yeah, definitely. And I definitely found that, when I left legal, trying to do a hypnotherapy track a friend had given me and be like, no, you got to get on and do stuff. You're not going to make any money just lying there on the sofa.
Yeah.
And that's the ego, right? So you also say it takes, real courage and also confidence for us to transcend or rise above our ego, that defense strategy. Why does it take courage?
Well, it takes courage because our ego is fear driven. And of course, when we're frightened, we're in our heads and all sorts of self-talk going on that might be, what if this happens? What if that happens? Discouraging ourselves. So that's why we've got to somehow get in touch with our heart energy. And in French, cœur means heart. That's the word for heart, which I think is why courage is such a valuable word. So that we act despite our fears. We take our fears with us by connecting with our hearts and helping move ourselves forward from that place of being courageous. And to do that, there is a sense of I'm okay in all of that. So there's something about starting to appreciate that whatever action you take, it's always I was connecting with myself. And this might sound like really basic stuff, but I think it's really, really powerful, is this action going to hurt you? Is it going to kill you? Is it going to physically damage you in whatever shape or form? The answer on the most occasions is no, it's not. And I learned that lesson from working with a GP who always had the most calm demeanor whenever we were talking about big change that was having to happen to his practice. And he said, "Do you know what, Mary? I'm faced with death and people dying and having their lives threatened every day. This is nothing compared to that." And it really made me think that actually, if we can just remind ourselves that, so the action might be you have to phone up 5 people. Well, is anyone going to die on the back of you phoning up 5 people? No, they're not. It's like act with that courage, connect with your heart and move forward and have this sense of okayness. I'll be okay and they'll be okay. And that's a great place to transcend your ego from. If we're in that fear mode at all, then we're going to be going into I'm not okay, or I'm okay and they're not okay. And I'm referring to a model actually that's in my book, which is all about whether we're okay or not. But I think that sense of okayness really helps us transcend.
Yeah, I often talk about self-securitizing, we have to find security within ourselves and it can be mucky. It's been, I've practiced a lot of yoga and meditation, and that really does bring a lot of awareness of triggers, of ego. And it can be a pretty mucky place to be. But I love how, really asking yourself those sensible questions around safety. And as you said, logging those emotional triggers and maybe sitting with it for a while before you can start to move forward. But that courage is needed.
Totally concur with the whole. I think meditation really helps us develop an ability to be present, because that's the other thing is whenever we're in ego, we're either in the past. So thinking about, we're triggered from something that's reminded us of the past, or we're worrying about the future. Then we're in ego. When we're absolutely present, that's a way of being able to transcend it. And meditation is a very powerful way to develop that ability to be present.
Yeah, totally agree. Now, when we when we've started to navigate the ego, and that work's never done, we've got to constantly, have that self-discovery. But when we feel like we're a little bit way down the track with that, how do we start to manage other people's ego? And jumping in, I love that you share about the drama triangle in your book, that the victim, the perpetrator, and the rescuer. And I remember, finding out about that myself and thinking, God, the entire criminal justice system is set around that drama triangle. So many of our structures and systems are.
Yeah. Well, it's something that you can see in most relationships at some time or another, not all the time, but there will be games going on. Yeah. And you see them in organizations too, different departments taking on different roles of persecutor or victim or rescuer. You see it everywhere. But the whole thing for me is that, particularly when I first started working with all of this whole thing about ego, it was like, people wanted to, a lot of leaders that I worked with wanted to be able to fix other people. Yeah. And actually, no, that's not the place to start. The place to start is to work on yourself first. And then once you started working on yourself first, you've got the resources to be able to navigate the tricky games that can go on in relationship. So, being able to manage yourself and notice this might be a game that I've gotten into here is really, really powerful. And then you have some choices as to how you actually respond to that game. And one thing might be not to engage in that game at all. You might actually say, I'm actually not going to get into this. I'm going to step aside and not get involved. But of course, in the workplace or when you're running a business, there are times it's not possible to avoid a game completely. So what I would encourage people to do is, again, through your own work and your own development, is to try and stick with the more positive roles of what I call the authentic triangle. So rather than rescuing somebody, it's so easy for us to fall, as a coach, I know this, so easy to fall into rescuing somebody, but rather than rescuing them, actually asking some really good questions that would help them, the other person, to make their own decisions, to open up their own options, rather than you fixing them and trying to sort them out.
Yeah, and I think what's really important within that as well, either in corporate or as coaches, is to ask people's permission as well, because so many people go in and fix without, without being asked as well. And I think it's such an important conversation in terms of the wider collective. We're seeing it in politics a lot. People driving down the drama triangle and the media, etc., and thinking that the world's going to change. But we have to start looking at ourselves first and see what dramas that we are jumping into and being part of.
Yes. Because absolutely.
For me, I refuse to play any part in that stuff anymore.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's hard to know you even got into it because it does happen unconsciously. But when you become conscious of, there's something going on here I'm not altogether comfortable with, that then opens up the choice. I've got a great example of a client of mine who was on one of my leadership programs, and she got into we'd just gone through the whole ego piece, talking about different ego states and the drama triangle and how we can get into these different difficult relationship dynamics. And she found herself in a meeting with a senior leader, and she knew that she wanted to try and influence in this meeting. So she was feeling quite, anxious, but, up for it and to give it a go. But quite soon into the meeting, this senior leader started becoming quite aggressive in his tone and quite patronizing towards her. And she could see this meeting wasn't going how she wanted it to go, but she knew that, it wasn't right. So she wanted to do something about it, and she wasn't quite sure what to do about it. But what she did was really, really great example of how to handle a tricky situation. First of all, she named it. She called it out. And she didn't call out and say, you're being aggressive or you're being a horrible leader. She called out her experience. She started to say, I'm feeling very uncomfortable in this meeting, and I can't put my finger on what it is, but there's something about your tone of voice and the way you're speaking to me that is causing me to feel uncomfortable. And she requested that the meeting end at that point. And that is one way of ending a game, is to stop it. Now, you can stop it temporarily or you can stop it permanently, depending on the situation. But they stopped it temporarily. And when they re-met, this senior leader was absolutely so apologetic, because he had not got any idea of the impact he was having on her in that meeting.
Yeah, and I think it's really powerful to report back how it is you're feeling about something without the blame, and then that gives someone else the space to step back and have a think about it.
And it transformed their relationship because he then wanted feedback from her as to what specifically he did that caused this difficulty in their communication. And of course, by then she'd had a chance to reflect on it, so she could give him some really good quality feedback. And that helped him with his relationships with other people.
It's a knock-on effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what impact and authenticity can we expect when we learn to rise above the ego?
Well, I think what you get a much greater sense of personal power. So rather than feeling a victim or like you might have over-egged it and dominated too much, there's a great sense of personal power, but it being kind of mutual and
grounded.
Grounded, and that sense of okayness that we're referring to as well. I think it also opens up possibilities. So rather than feeling like things are getting closed and shut down, it opens up the possibility for exploring, and absolutely it opens up the possibility for creating much stronger connected relationships, and for transformation, actually, is to transform relationships too, which I think that example I just gave, she absolutely transformed the relationship with that leader through just speaking her truth in that moment. Very, very powerful.
Yeah, and I love that, exploring possibility instead of being shut down, because I think so many women's experience in many forms is that being shut down in some way, shape or form. So that really opens up that space. Now, Mary, what is next for you and where can we find you?
Right. Well, you can find me on all the different social media channels, and particularly on LinkedIn, Mary Gregory, executive and leadership coach. And also I do have an Instagram account, but only because I like posting photographs and I do like Instagram. And I have a website, marygregory.com, so do look out for me there as well. I'm currently designing an online program. So I'm putting it out there. It's early days, but it's all about supporting leaders who really want to play a big game and want to leave a legacy. So that's the program I'm designing at the moment. And of course, to do that, you're going to have to get over your ego, because it's a frightening thing to do.
Yes. And any of our listeners can buy your book via your website and also on Amazon.
Oh, no, it's definitely on Amazon, yes. And you can download a free chapter from my website if you want to just get a flavour of it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being with us, Mary.
My absolute pleasure. It's been gorgeous, Lulu. Thank you so much.
I'll speak soon.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to She Rebel Radio. It's been an honour to support you taking the time to discover more of your genius. And we thank our partners NatWest for supporting this series. Since the publication of the Rose Review, NatWest have been working to deliver real support for women to create their business of significance. From launching the Investing in Women Code to backing $1 billion of female entrepreneurship funding, NatWest are also educating young women through Dream Bigger, inspiring the future generations of female entrepreneurs. From their Business Builder online course to their flagship Accelerator program, NatWest can support you to upskill at your own pace in a way that allows you to stay in control as you start, scale, and succeed. Visit www.natwestbusinesshub.com for more. If you'd like to attend a retreat with me, visit lulumins.com, and don't forget to join us in furthering the conversation on social media. Just search for NatWest Business or Lulu Mins in Google and on all social media platforms.